The Apache woman who entered my barn, then woke up in my bed. He had always believed that nights on the ranch were predictable. When the sun went down, the land became quiet in a way that felt almost sacred. The wind moved through the dry grass like a slow breath. Crickets filled the silence. The animals settled. Nothing unexpected ever happened. That belief had stayed with him for years, until the night the woman walked into his barn. He lived alone on the edge of a wide, empty stretch of land. The nearest town was more than 40 minutes away, and even that place felt small and distant. His days were long, filled with work that left his body tired and his mind clear. He repaired fences, fed animals, fixed old tools, and kept the land running the way his father once had. After his father passed away, the ranch became his full responsibility and also his refuge. He did not complain about the loneliness. In fact, he had grown used to it. Silence did not scare him, people did. That evening, a storm rolled in without much warning. Dark clouds gathered low in the sky and the air grew heavy. Rain was rare in that season, but when it came strong. He finished his work early, closed the barn doors, and went inside his house to make a simple meal. As thunder echoed far away, he sat at the small wooden table and ate slowly, listening to the sound of rain hitting the roof. It was close to midnight when he heard it. At first he thought it was just the wind. The storm had grown louder and old buildings often made strange noises. But then he heard it again. A sharp sound, not metal, not wood breaking, footsteps. He froze. No one ever came to his ranch at night. Not neighbors, not strangers, not animals. His land was fenced and the gate was always closed. His heart started beating faster, not from fear alone, but from disbelief. He stood up slowly and listened. The sound came again, clearer this time, from the direction of the barn. He reached for his jacket and slipped it on. He did not carry anger or panic with him, but caution. Living alone had taught him to be careful. He grabbed a flashlight from the counter, checked that it worked, and stepped outside into the rain. The storm had softened, but the ground was wet and cold. Mud stuck to his boots as he walked. The barn stood in the distance, dark and silent, its shape barely visible under the cloudy sky. As he got closer, he noticed something that made his chest tighten. The barn door was not fully closed. He knew he had shut it before going inside. He never forgot things like that. He slowed his steps and lifted the flashlight, pointing it toward the opening. The light cut through the darkness, revealing hay, tools, and empty space. For a moment he saw nothing unusual. He took another step inside, calling out in a low voice, asking if anyone was there. There was no answer. Then he saw movement. Someone was crouched near the back of the barn, half hidden behind stacked hay bales. The figure did not rush or attack. Instead, it pulled back slightly, as if trying to disappear. His first thought was that it might be a thief. His second thought was that the person looked too small and unsteady to be dangerous. He lifted the flashlight higher, careful not to blind whoever it was. That was when he saw her. She was a woman, clearly exhausted. Her clothes were soaked and torn at the edges. Her long, dark hair clung to her face and neck. She looked thin, fragile, and very tired. Her eyes reflected fear, not threat. She raised her hand slightly, a silent signal that she did not want trouble. They stared at each other for several seconds, both unsure of what to do. He noticed details slowly, the way the mind does when it tries to make sense of something unexpected. Her skin showed signs of cold. Her hands were shaking. There was dirt on her arms and a dark stain on the side of her shirt that looked like dried blood. He lowered the flashlight a little. He spoke gently, asking who she was and why she was there. His words came out calm, though his heart was still racing. She did not answer. Instead, she said something in a language he did not understand. Her voice was weak, almost breaking, as if she had not spoken in hours. He realized then that she might not understand English very well or at all. She took a step back, then another, clearly afraid that he would force her out or call someone. She pointed to the door, then to herself, and shook her head. It was not hard to understand what she meant. She did not want to go back outside. Not tonight. He felt a heavy weight settle in his chest. He had not planned for this. He did not know her story. He did not know where she came from or what kind of trouble she might be involved in. All he knew was that she was hurt, cold, and desperate enough to hide in a stranger's barn during a storm. He asked her if she was injured. She hesitated, then nodded slightly. When she tried to stand fully, her legs gave out. She collapsed to her knees, catching herself on the hay. The effort seemed to drain what little strength she had left. Without thinking too much, he stepped forward. He kept his movements slow and open, showing he meant no harm. He reached out, not touching her yet, and spoke softly, telling her she was safe for now. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with confusion and pain. For a moment, she seemed to argue with herself, torn between fear and need. Finally, she let out a breath and did not pull away when he offered his arm to help her stand. She leaned on him lightly, barely able to support her own weight. Up close, he could see that her face was pale and drawn. She smelled of rain, earth, and exhaustion. He guided her toward a small stool near the wall and helped her sit down. He knelt beside her, keeping a respectful distance. Using simple gestures, he asked if he could look at her injury. She nodded again, more slowly this time. He carefully lifted the edge of her shirt where the dark stain was. It was not fresh, but it was serious enough to worry him. The wound looked poorly treated, if at all. He felt anger rise inside him, not toward her, but toward whoever had left her like this. He stood up and pointed toward the house, then back to her, then mimed warmth and rest. He did not know if she understood every part, but she understood enough. Her shoulders relaxed just a little. As he helped her stand again, she suddenly swayed. Her head dropped forward and her grip on his arm tightened. Her breathing became uneven. He called out to her, trying to keep her awake, but her body was already giving in to exhaustion. She fainted. For a moment, panic hit him hard. He had not expected that. He checked her breathing quickly. It was shallow but steady. Relief washed over him, followed by worry. He could not leave her on the cold barn floor. He could not pretend he had not found her. He lifted her carefully. She was lighter than he expected, which troubled him even more. Carrying her out into the rain, he moved quickly toward the house. Every step felt heavy with responsibility. He knew that once he crossed that door with her in his arms, his quiet life would change, even if only for a short time. Inside the house, the warmth was immediate. He laid her gently on the couch at first, then hesitated. The couch was narrow and stiff. She needed proper rest, somewhere warm and safe. After a brief pause, he carried her to the bedroom. He placed her on the bed, laying a blanket over her. He stepped back, suddenly aware of how strange and serious the situation was. A woman he had never met had entered his barn, and now she was asleep in his bed. Not by choice or comfort, but by necessity. He cleaned her wound as best as he could, using clean water and bandages from an old first aid kit. He worked carefully, respectfully, avoiding unnecessary contact. When he finished, he sat on the chair by the bed and watched her breathe. Outside, the storm slowly faded. Inside, nothing felt the same anymore. He did not sleep that night. He stayed awake, listening, thinking, wondering who she was, where she came from, and what danger might be following her. He did not know that this single night would stay with him for the rest of his life. All he knew was that a stranger had come to his barn seeking shelter, and he had opened his door. Morning light crept into the room slowly, thin and pale, slipping through the old curtains. The ranch was quiet again, as if the storm had never happened. The man sat in the chair beside the bed, his body stiff from staying awake all night. His eyes were tired, but his mind refused to rest. Every few minutes, he checked the woman's breathing, half expecting her to vanish the way unexpected things sometimes did in dreams. She did not vanish. She stirred instead. At first, it was only a small movement of her fingers. Then her brow tightened and a soft sound escaped her lips, more like a breath than a word. He leaned forward slightly, careful not to startle her. When her eyes finally opened, they were wide and unfocused, taking in the unfamiliar room in quick, frightened glances. She pushed herself up halfway, then stopped, confused and tense. Her eyes landed on him. Fear flashed across her face. She pulled the blanket closer to her body and backed toward the head of the bed, her breathing quick and shallow. She spoke rapidly in a language he did not understand, her voice shaking. Her hands moved in front of her, palms out, as if asking him to stay where he was. He raised his hands slowly, showing they were empty. He spoke softly, telling her she was safe, telling her she was not in danger. He kept his voice low and steady, the way one would speak to a frightened animal. He did not move closer. He did not want to add to her fear. She watched him closely, her eyes searching his face, looking for signs of threat. The room was small and plain. There were no locks on the door, no hidden corners. Slowly, some of the panic faded from her expression, replaced by confusion. She touched the bandage on her side and winced slightly. Then she looked back at him, realization beginning to form. She pointed at the bandage, then at him, and tilted her head in a silent question. "Yes," he said gently, even though he was not sure she understood the word. He pointed to the bandage and then to a small first aid box on the shelf. He mimed cleaning and wrapping a wound. Her shoulders lowered just a bit. She exhaled, long and shaky, like someone who had been holding their breath for far too long. She tried to stand up too quickly. Her legs weakened and she swayed. He stood at once, but stopped himself halfway, not wanting to frighten her again. Seeing his hesitation, she reached out on her own and placed her hand lightly on the edge of the bed for balance. "I'm sorry," he said, even though she might not understand. "Please sit, rest." She did sit back down, though she kept her eyes on him. There was a sharp awareness in her gaze, like someone who had learned the hard way to never fully relax. He stepped out of the room for a moment and returned with a glass of water. He placed it on the small table near the bed instead of handing it to her directly. He stepped back and waited. She watched the glass, then him, then the door. After a moment she picked it up and drank slowly. Her hands were still shaking, but less than before. When she finished, she set the glass down carefully and gave him a small nod. Gratitude, quiet and cautious. The silence between them felt heavy but not empty. It was filled with questions neither of them could fully ask. He pointed to himself. "I'm Daniel," he said clearly. She hesitated, then pointed to herself and spoke a name softly. It sounded unfamiliar to his ears, shaped by a language he did not know well. He tried to repeat it, but she shook her head gently and smiled faintly, correcting him. He tried again, slower this time. Her smile grew just a little. It was the first sign of warmth he had seen from her. She gestured toward the window, then made a motion of walking, followed by a sharp turn of her head as if looking behind her. Her face darkened. She shook her head firmly and pressed her lips together. "You're being followed," he asked, unsure if the words mattered. He mimed people searching, eyes scanning the land. Her response was immediate. She nodded once, hard. Fear returned to her eyes. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This was the part he had been afraid of. Trouble rarely came alone. It usually brought more with it. He asked if she was hungry. Hunger was easier to understand. She paused, then nodded again. He motioned for her to stay where she was and left the room. In the kitchen, he moved quietly, his thoughts racing. He had brought a stranger into his home. He did not regret it, but he could not ignore the risk. Still, when he imagined sending her back outside, injured and afraid, the thought felt wrong in a way he could not explain. He prepared a simple meal, nothing fancy. Bread, soup, fruit. Food meant comfort. Food meant safety, even if only for a moment. When he returned, he placed the tray on the table and stepped back again. She looked at the food with something close to disbelief. She picked up the spoon slowly, as if expecting it to be taken away. After the first bite, her eyes closed briefly. Relief softened her face. As she ate, her strength seemed to return bit by bit. Color came back to her cheeks. Her movements grew steadier. She spoke again, quietly, telling fragments of her story through gestures, broken words, and expressions. He listened carefully, not interrupting, not pushing her to explain more than she could. He understood enough to piece together the shape of it. She had left her home in fear. The people meant to protect her had not helped her. She had run, trusting no one, moving at night, hiding during the day. By the time she reached his land, she had nothing left but hope and desperation. When she finished, she looked down at her hands, shame and sadness heavy in her posture. She seemed to expect judgment. "You did nothing wrong," he said gently, even if she could not understand every word. His tone carried the meaning. "You survived." She looked up at him then, truly looked at him, and for the first time she did not seem afraid of his presence. Tears welled in her eyes, but she did not let them fall. Instead, she nodded once slowly. Later, she insisted on helping, even though he told her to rest. She stood in the kitchen, carefully washing her cup, moving as if she wanted to prove she was not a burden. He watched her from a distance, noticing how alert she remained, how often she glanced toward the windows. A vehicle passed on the distant road. She froze. Her body tensed instantly, her hand gripping the counter. Her eyes filled with alarm. He stepped closer, keeping his voice calm. He told her it was nothing, just someone passing through. He was not sure if she believed him, but she forced herself to relax again. That moment changed something for him. This was not just about kindness anymore. Whatever she was running from was close enough to reach his land. Helping her meant choosing a side, even if he did not fully understand the conflict. As the day went on, he showed her where she could rest, where the bathroom was, where she could find clean clothes he had set aside. He kept his distance, giving her space and control whenever possible. In the afternoon, she sat near the window, watching the open land beyond the fence. The world looked calm, almost peaceful, but her eyes told a different story. She was listening for danger that only she could sense. He stood outside for a long moment, staring across the fields. The ranch had always been a place of isolation, of safety through distance. Now it felt exposed, fragile. When evening came, he prepared another meal. They ate together in silence, not awkward but thoughtful. Two strangers brought together by chance, sitting at the same table, knowing their lives would never return to what they had been before. As night settled again, he made up a place for himself on the couch. He did not question it. It felt like the right thing to do. Before going to bed, she paused at the doorway of the bedroom. She turned and looked at him. Slowly, she placed her hand over her heart and gave a small bow of her head. "Thank you," she said in careful English. He nodded. "You're welcome." When the lights went out, the ranch returned to silence. But it was no longer the quiet of loneliness. It was the quiet of waiting. The third day began quietly, but the quiet felt different now. It was not peaceful the way it used to be on the ranch. It was careful, like the land itself was holding its breath. Daniel woke early, as he always did. For a moment, he forgot she was there. Then he heard a soft sound from the bedroom, the faint movement of someone shifting in sleep, and everything came back to him at once. He sat up on the couch, rubbed his face, and listened. She was awake too. When she came into the kitchen, she looked stronger than the day before. The color in her face had returned a little more, and she walked without swaying. Still, there was a tension in her shoulders that never fully left. She greeted him with a small nod and a quiet word of thanks, then sat at the table. They shared breakfast in near silence. It was not uncomfortable. It felt like two people learning how to exist in the same space without causing harm. Daniel noticed how she ate slowly, as if she had learned to make food last. He noticed how she kept her back straight, her eyes alert, always aware of where he was and where the doors were. After breakfast, she surprised him by speaking more English than before. The words came slowly, carefully chosen, but they came. "My name," she said, touching her chest, "is Ayana." He repeated it, this time correctly. She nodded, pleased. She looked around the kitchen, then back at him. I tell you, she said, why I run. He did not interrupt. He sat down across from her and waited. She took a deep breath. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed them on the table. When she spoke, her voice was low but steady, like someone who had told this story to herself many times but had never felt safe saying it out loud. She talked about her home, far from the ranch. She spoke of a place that was meant to be safe, where family and community should have meant protection. But instead, it became a place of fear. People with power used their position to control others. When she asked for help, she was ignored. When she tried to speak up, she was warned to stay quiet. Daniel listened, his jaw tightening with every sentence. He did not need every detail to understand the truth of it. He had seen enough of the world to know how often people were failed by the systems meant to protect them. Iana explained how she left in the middle of the night with only a small bag. She traveled on foot, took rides when she could, slept in places no one would look. Each day was about staying invisible. Each night was about surviving until morning. The barn, she said softly, was light. In storm, I saw light. Daniel realized then that he had left the barn lamp on without thinking. A small habit, something he had done 1,000 times before. That light had guided her to him. You were hurt, he said gently. Who did that? She hesitated, then shook her head. Does not matter now, she said. I live. He wanted to argue, to say it did matter, that it always mattered. But he could see she was not ready to go there. So he nodded and let it rest. The day moved on slowly. Daniel showed her the property from a distance, pointing out the fence lines, the road, the fields. He explained where he worked, where animals were kept. He wanted her to understand the land, to feel less trapped by it. She asked careful questions. How far was the nearest town? How often did people come by? Did anyone know she was there? He answered honestly. The town was far. People rarely visited, and no one knew. That last answer seemed to ease her slightly, but it also made her look down, guilt flickering across her face. You helped me, she said quietly. Bring trouble to you. He met her eyes. You didn't bring trouble, he said. Trouble exists whether we invite it or not. She did not respond, but his words stayed with her. In the afternoon, Daniel was fixing a fence near the edge of the property when he heard a sound that did not belong. An engine. Slow, careful. His body reacted before his mind did. He straightened and looked toward the road. A vehicle was moving along the dirt path outside the fence. It was not one he recognized. It slowed as it passed his land, then stopped. His heart began to pound. He walked calmly toward the house, forcing his steps to remain steady. As he reached the porch, he saw Iana through the window. She was already standing, her face pale, her body rigid. They are close, she whispered when he stepped inside. He nodded. Stay back, he said gently. Let me handle this. There was a knock at the door. Daniel opened it to find 2 men standing outside. They were polite, well-dressed, smiling in a way that did not reach their eyes. They asked if he had seen a woman matching Iana's description. They said she might be in danger. They said they only wanted to help. Daniel listened, his face calm, his voice steady. He told them he lived alone, that no one had come through. That storm sometimes drove animals into the barns, but not people. The men exchanged a look. One of them glanced past Daniel, toward the interior of the house. Mind if we take a look? One asked. Daniel shook his head. I do mind, he said. This is private property. The smile faded slightly. The men thanked him for his time and returned to their vehicle. As they drove away, Daniel stood on the porch until the dust settled. Only then did he go back inside. Iana was shaking. She had pressed herself into the corner of the room, ready to run. They lied, she said. They say help, but it is not. I know, Daniel said. That moment changed everything. This was no longer a temporary kindness. This was a line crossed. He had lied to protect her. He had refused people who carried authority. Whatever came next would not be simple. That night they talked long after the sun went down, about fear, about trust, about the cost of doing the right thing. Daniel admitted something he had not said out loud before, that he had chosen this isolated life because it was easier than dealing with people. That helping her scared him, not because of danger, but because it reminded him that he still cared. Yana listened, her expression soft. "You are not alone because you are empty," she said. "You are alone because you were hurt too." The words struck him deeper than he expected. As the night grew quiet, Ayana packed her few things. Daniel watched her, understanding before she said anything. "I must go," she said, "before more come." His chest tightened. He wanted to tell her to stay. He wanted to promise safety he could not guarantee. Instead, he nodded slowly. "We'll figure something out," he said. "Together." She looked at him then, truly looked at him, and for the first time since she arrived, there was hope in her eyes. Outside, the land stretched wide and silent, holding their secret for now. The night after the visitors came was the longest night Daniel could remember. Sleep did not come easily to either of them. The house felt smaller, every sound louder than it should have been. The wind outside moved through the trees, and each rustle made Ayana lift her head, listening. Daniel sat at the table with a cup of cold coffee, staring at the window. He kept thinking about the questions the men had asked, the way their eyes searched past him. He had lived on this land for years without trouble. Now trouble had found him without asking. Yana came into the room quietly. She did not speak at first. She stood near the doorway, holding her small bag close to her chest. Daniel noticed that she had packed everything she owned again. "You don't have to leave tonight," he said gently. She shook her head. "If I stay, they come again," she said. "You will be in danger." "I'm already in it," he replied. She looked down. "I did not want this," she said softly. "I did not want to hurt you." "You didn't," he said. "You didn't choose what happened to you." They sat across from each other, the space between them filled with things they both understood but did not know how to say. Daniel realized something then. Helping her was no longer just about keeping her safe. It was about choosing what kind of person he wanted to be. The next morning they planned carefully. They did not rush. Rushing led to mistakes. Daniel showed her an old truck parked behind the shed. It had belonged to his father. He rarely used it, but it still ran well. He explained the roads, the places where traffic was light, the towns where she could blend in. He gave her a map and circled a few locations with a pen. Gianna listened closely, memorizing everything. She asked questions, thoughtful ones. She was no longer just running. She was planning a future. "You do not have to do this alone," Daniel said. She smiled sadly. "I have been alone for a long time," she said, "but not empty anymore." They waited until late afternoon. The light softened, shadows stretching long across the fields. Daniel kept watch from the porch while Iana rested inside. Every time a vehicle passed far away, his muscles tightened. Finally, she stood up and took a deep breath. "It is time," she said. He nodded. They walked together to the truck. Daniel handed her the keys. For a moment, neither of them moved. The weight of the moment settled between them. "I wish I could do more," he said. "You did enough," she replied. "You saw me. That is more than most." She paused, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small woven bracelet. It was simple, worn, clearly important to her. "For protection," she said, placing it in his hand. "And memory." Daniel closed his fingers around it. He felt something tighten in his chest, something close to loss. "If you ever need help," he said, "you come back. Or you send word," she nodded. "And you," she said, "do not close yourself again." She got into the truck and started the engine. Daniel stepped back as the vehicle rolled slowly down the path. He stood there until the sound faded and the dust settled. The land returned to silence, but the silence was different now. It was heavier, filled with unanswered questions. Days passed. Daniel returned to his routine, but everything felt changed. He checked the road more often. He locked doors he had never locked before. At night, he replayed every decision in his mind, wondering if he had done the right thing. One afternoon, another vehicle came down the road. Daniel's heart jumped, but this time it was different. It was a local officer, someone he recognized from town. The man asked a few questions, casual on the surface, careful underneath. Had Daniel seen a woman traveling alone? Had anyone passed through recently? Daniel answered honestly but carefully. He spoke of storms, of empty roads, of long days alone. The officer nodded, thanked him, and left. Daniel watched until the vehicle disappeared. That night, Daniel sat at the table holding the bracelet. He realized how close he had come to turning her away that first night. How easy it would have been to pretend he heard nothing. The thought unsettled him deeply. Weeks passed with no word. Then one morning a letter arrived. No return address, just his name written carefully on the envelope. Inside was a single page. She was safe. She had found people who listened. She was starting over slowly, carefully. She thanked him again, not just for shelter, but for reminding her that kindness still existed. Daniel folded the letter and held it for a long time. That night, he stepped outside and looked across the open land. The stars were bright, the air cool. The ranch was still quiet, still isolated, but it no longer felt empty. He understood something now that he had not before. Lives did not change only through big moments. Sometimes they changed because one person chose to open a door instead of closing it. And that choice stayed with him, long after the road went silent again. Life on the ranch slowly returned to its old rhythm, but Daniel knew it would never truly be the same again. The morning still began with the sun rising over the open land, painting the fields in soft gold. The animals still needed care. The fences still needed repair. From the outside, nothing had changed, but inside him, something had shifted, settled into a new shape. He found himself thinking about small things differently now. When he walked into the barn, he noticed the corner where Ayana had hidden that first night. The hay had been moved since then, but the memory stayed. Sometimes he paused there longer than necessary, remembering the fear in her eyes, the strength it took for her to keep going even when she was hurt and alone. Daniel was not a man who talked much, even with himself, but now his thoughts were louder. He questioned the choices he had made in his life, why he had chosen distance over connection, why he had believed that being alone meant being safe. Helping Ayana had not made his life easier. If anything, it had added worry, risk, and responsibility. Yet it had also given him something he had not realized he was missing, purpose that came from caring about someone beyond himself. Weeks passed without incident. No strangers came down the road. No questions were asked. The land settled back into silence. But Daniel did not relax completely. He stayed alert, not from fear but from awareness. He had learned that calm could be fragile. Sometimes at night he sat on the porch and looked out at the dark fields. He thought about Ayana, wondering where she was, if she was warm, if she was finding peace. He hoped she had reached a place where she could finally sleep without listening for danger. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel noticed something he had not seen in a long time. He felt lonely. It surprised him. Before, loneliness had been his normal state, something quiet and familiar. Now it felt different, sharper, like an absence he could name. He realized that knowing someone had trusted him had changed how he saw the world. Connection, once experienced, was hard to forget. A month later, the letter arrived. Daniel found it in his mailbox early in the morning. The envelope was plain, but he recognized the careful writing immediately. His hands paused midair as he held it. For a moment, he was afraid to open it, afraid of what it might say. He sat at the kitchen table before breaking the seal. The letter was simple. The words were not perfect, but they were clear. Yana wrote that she was safe. She had reached a town far from the ranch. There were people there who listened to her story and treated her with respect. She was staying in a small place of her own. It was not much, she said, but it was hers. She wrote about learning new routines, about finding work that kept her busy and tired in a good way. She wrote about mornings where she woke up without fear, where the quiet felt gentle instead of threatening. She thanked him again, but not with dramatic words. She thanked him for seeing her as a person when she felt invisible, for giving her time instead of questions, for choosing kindness when it would have been easier to turn away. At the end of the letter, she wrote something that stayed with him long after he folded the paper. "You helped me remember who I was," she wrote. "I hope you remember who you are too." Daniel sat there for a long time after reading it. The house was silent, but it did not feel empty. He placed the letter carefully in a drawer next to the bracelet she had given him. They felt like reminders, quiet but powerful. As the seasons changed, Daniel noticed other changes too. He drove into town more often. Not because he needed supplies, but because he no longer felt the same urge to avoid people. He spoke more when spoken to. He listened more closely. He even helped a neighbor fix a broken fence one afternoon. It was a small thing, but afterward he realized how long it had been since he had worked alongside someone else. The ranch remained his home, his anchor, but it was no longer his hiding place. One evening, many months later, Daniel saw a light on the horizon. Not a vehicle, not a threat, just the moon rising bright and steady. It reminded him of that stormy night, of the barn light he had left on without thinking. He smiled faintly. Sometimes he realized small choices mattered more than grand plans, leaving a light on, opening a door, saying yes instead of no. Daniel did not know if he would ever see Ayana again. Life rarely gave clear endings or neat reunions, but he knew that the connection they shared did not need to last forever to be real. It had changed them both. On quiet nights, when the wind moved through the grass and the stars filled the sky, Daniel felt something close to peace. Not the peace of isolation, but the peace of understanding. He understood now that being strong did not mean standing alone. Sometimes strength meant letting another person into your life, even if only for a short time. The ranch was still quiet, but it was no longer silent.